wisdom in sharing this with other people as well, so that their lives may be improved, and in fact, may they be saved in your kingdom because of our efforts. Be with our discussion today in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, we're near the end of this book, and we've spent most of the book talking about nutrition, one aspect or another. And today we are going to talk about some other healthful factors, and it's the rest of the New Start acronym. And then after this, in the second hour, we'll talk about some of the things that are particularly bad that we should stay away from. And then in the third hour, we'll present one example of healthful living that doesn't come from the Adventist Health Study. It comes from a smaller study, but has very nice results. And then we can have a little discussion following that. But this is chapter 13 in the book, The Healthiest People, The Science Behind Seventh-day Adventist Success. It's actually a fairly short chapter, but today's lecture has, both of today's lectures have a lot of extra information in them. So you'll want to take some notes when it doesn't sound like it's coming from the book, or you might get a copy of the lecture and take a look at it. Pure air is an important health factor, and I don't cover a lot of that in my book. The air pollution has its primary effect on the lungs and can alter pulmonary function tests. And air pollution makes asthma worse, and also chronic obstructive lung disease, which includes emphysema and chronic bronchitis. And then, just as secondhand cigarette smoke does, air pollution can affect cardiovascular diseases and increase the risk of angina pectoris, increase the risk of heart attacks. And it was surprising to me to find that air pollution affects pregnancy outcomes. There are more preterm births within a certain distance of freeways compared to births for mothers who live much further away. And as a result of all of this, air pollution is a factor that increases mortality. And the World Health Organization has classed air pollution as a carcinogen. In some parts of the world where air pollution is really severe, it has been shown to increase the risk of cancer. And air pollution is not just a single item. It has a gas phase and it has a particulate phase. And the gas phase has ozone in it, which is harmful to your lungs and harmful to health. And then there are a lot of oxides of nitrogen. Nitrogen, and that is NO, NO2, NO3, NO4, oxides of nitrogen are very reactive substances and are harmful. And then there are a surprising number of polyaromatic hydrocarbons, and we'll be talking a little bit more about those in the next lecture. And then there are a fair number of polychlorinated biphenyls, which are outlawed at the present, but for many years were used as insulating fluids in transformers on power poles. They are very good insulating liquids, and they're not flammable, but they're not good for human health. And all of this contributes to the gas phase of air pollution. Then you have the particulate phase, and this is basically just dust, but they are dust that are so fine that they don't settle out. They remain suspended because they're so small. And then you have fine black carbon particles in places where they burn coal or burn diesel fuel or burn even gasoline. And so these are the main And if you were to go to a textbook on air pollution, they would break this down further and you would end up with actually thousands of different compounds. And air pollution varies significantly by location. And I did reference this article in my book. And in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, in the air pollution there, it's primarily the ozone that is very high. And in Los Angeles, it tends to be dust particulates. And a lot of them blow in off of the high desert. In New York City, you have more carbon particles and more oxides of nitrogen. So there is a qualitative and quantitative difference in air pollution. So air pollution varies widely from city to city and from place to place. That's the take-home point on that. I couldn't find much reference to air pollution in the scriptures, but in Revelation 9, 1 and 2, under the fifth angel, it says, "Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit." And that certainly is a very accurate description of air pollution. It darkens the sun and darkens the air. I remember when I first moved to Loma Linda, California, I awoke one day in October and suddenly saw mountains. And I had moved to California and lived there for 2 or 3 months, never seen the mountains because of the smog. And when it cleared one day, whoo, there are the mountains. Mrs. White has quite a bit to say about clean air, and she says, "To many of those living in the cities who have not a spot of green grass to set their feet upon, who year after year have looked out upon filthy courts and narrow alleys, brick walls and pavements, and skies clouded with dust and smoke, if these could be taken to some farming district surrounded with green fields, the woods and the hills and the brooks, the clear skies and the fresh, pure air of the country, it would seem almost like heaven." And I think that obviously there was air pollution in her day, and she valued clean air. And there are a couple of other comments about clean air. She says, "The free, pure air of heaven is one of the richest blessings we can enjoy."
Yeah, it does.
So, I don't know.
And then she says, "Look up to the blue sky, unobscured by the city's dust and smoke, and breathe the invigorating air of heaven. Go where, apart from the distractions and dissipations of city life, you can give your children your companionship, where you can teach them to learn of God through his works and train them for lives of integrity and usefulness." And so you can see in her day, she was saying, get out of the cities, particularly where there is dust and smoke, recognizing the two components of air pollution. And now we come to sunlight, and we'll spend a little bit of time on this. Sunshine has some very important benefits. It is crucial for vitamin D production. It prevents some autoimmune diseases, and sunshine stimulates alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone that reduces cancer by enhancing DNA damage repair. The calcitonin gene related peptide creates immunologic tolerance and helps with psoriasis. So sunlight is great for psoriasis. And neuropeptide P increases lymphocyte proliferation, and endorphins are stimulated, and so we have a sense of well-being. I just wanted to, I'm going to say a little more about vitamin D production, but vitamin D, vitamin D is actually a hormone, and it's actually made in the body, and we make all that we need. And the precursors that are stimulated by sunlight first travel to the kidneys, where a hydroxyl group, that's an oxygen and hydrogen, a hydroxyl group is added on at the #1 position in the molecule. Then it travels to the liver, and the liver puts on another hydroxyl group at the 25 position, and that is the active form of vitamin D. So 1,25 dihydroxycholecalciferol is active vitamin D, and we make that in the body. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Vitamin D, it turns out, has an extremely wide influence throughout the body. The best known benefit of sunlight is its ability to boost the body's vitamin D supply. And most cases of vitamin D deficiency are due to a lack of outdoor sun exposure. But notice this is crucial. At least 1,000 genes governing virtually every tissue in the body are now thought to be regulated by the 1,25-dihydroxy vitamin D. The active form of the vitamin, including several genes that are involved in calcium metabolism and neuromuscular and immune system functioning. And so vitamin D impacts the body through its influence on more than 1,000 genes. And vitamin D in bone density is our next study. And on the screen you see 4 bones. The healthiest one is the one on the left. And as you progress to the right, there are more and more large holes in the bone, and that is a sign of osteoporosis. And porosis is the word porous, and porous means it has a lot of holes in it. A sieve is porous. Window screens are porous. So osteoporosis is bones that have a lot of holes in them. And of course, they are very weak and prone to develop fractures. And I'm going to start with this study of vitamin D and bone density. And this was done in Calgary, Canada. And that's a good place to do it because the further north you get, the less sunshine you have, and the more likely you are to develop vitamin D deficiencies and have problems. This is not a big study, but I think it's an important study. It was done on 311 community dwelling adults, and the average age was 62. And it was a double-blind study, so you know that means that the subject wasn't sure what level they were getting, and the administrating physician wasn't sure what dose of vitamin D they were getting. And they followed these people for 36 months, and they did multiple bone density studies over this time, and they gave them 3 doses of vitamin D. The control group got 400 international units of vitamin D, which is a low dose, and probably very similar to what a lot of people would get every day in food anyway. And then they jumped that up to a fairly high level of 4,000 international units a day. And then the really high group got 10,000 international units of vitamin D a day. And all of these were by pills. And so the next question would be, did the vitamin D get into their body? Did it do any good? Well, in the table at the top here, you can see that those who were given 400 international units a day, their baseline vitamin D level was 76 millimoles per liter. And at the end of 36 months, it was 77 millimoles per liter. So it had no effect whatsoever. Those getting 4,000 international units a day, Their baseline vitamin D level was 81 millimoles per liter, and theirs did go up. It went up from 81 to 115 millimoles per liter, so they were having an increased level of vitamin D. And then look at the group getting 10,000 international units. Their vitamin D level went from 78 millimoles to 188, which more than doubled. So it more than doubled their vitamin D levels. And so what happened to bone density? Now, everybody's bone density goes down over time, especially if you're in your 60s, as these people were. And so the very top curve that went down the least is the group that got 400 international units of vitamin D. And the intermediate line with the little colored triangles were the people that got 4,000 international units, and their bone density deteriorated more rapidly than those who got the 400 units. But the people that were least fortunate were those getting the 10,000 international units a day, because their bone density decreased the most. And so this is a very important study. And it shows that if you want to increase your vitamin D, don't take a pill. If you take a pill, you can increase your vitamin D level, but it will not help you. Very important point. It will make things worse. So the best way to get your vitamin D is with sunshine. So now let's look at, so anyway, this is the conclusion. Here, low vitamin D levels do result in loss of bone density and development of osteoporosis. This study shows that taking vitamin D in high doses by mouth raises blood levels of vitamin D. But this study also shows that taking vitamin D in high doses by mouth results in accelerated bone loss. So in conclusion, correcting vitamin D levels by sunshine is better than taking vitamin D by mouth. Now we're going to look at vitamin D and heart attacks. And it is a fact that low vitamin D levels increase the risk of heart attacks, increase the risk of strokes and congestive heart failure, and several cancers. And this is a study that was a review study. We call those a meta-analysis. And in this study, they reviewed 21 randomized clinical trials. So these are ethical studies, and people were not selected with any bias. These were randomized. And the total study population in these 21 clinical trials is really big, 83,291. And 41,669 got vitamin D supplementation, and 41,622 got placebo that looked like the vitamin D. And the follow-up in each of these studies varied from 1 to 12 years, okay? And so what was the result? Heart attacks were exactly the same in both groups. Vitamin D and placebo had the same number of heart attacks. Strokes were the same in both groups. Vitamin D and placebo had the same number of strokes. Congestive heart failure was the same in both groups, and the other cardiovascular diseases were the same in both groups as well. So based on 21 studies randomized with 80,000 people, taking vitamin D by mouth does not protect anybody from heart attacks or strokes or congestive heart failure or any cardiovascular disease. And so the only way to get the protective effects of sunshine is to get it from sunshine. Taking it by mouth does not protect anybody from cardiovascular diseases. That was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association Cardiology issue in June of last year. And so it's a very recent study. Mrs. White had quite a bit to say about sunshine. She said, life in the open air is good for body and mind. It is God's medicine for the restoration of health. Pure air, good water, sunshine, the beautiful surroundings of nature, these are his means for restoring the sick to health in natural ways. To the sick, it is worth more than silver or gold to lie in the sunshine or in the shade of trees. And so rather than spending your silver and gold on vitamin D capsules, spend your time in the sunshine, because it'll be worth more than anything you can invest in vitamin D pills. And it will be beneficial to you. And so these are some fractures. So we've looked at osteoporosis, we've looked at cardiovascular diseases. Now let's look at actual fractures. And the two most common fractures of the hip are the femoral neck fractures through the thinnest part of the bone, and the second most common is the intertrochanteric fracture through a large part of the femur. And needless to say, both of these require surgery and nails and screws to stabilize these fractures. Now, another fracture that I didn't put a picture up was vertebral fractures. And the vertebral fractures that you get are where a vertebrae collapses on itself. And although it's very painful because you've broken a bone, they are in fact stable. You do lose a little height in doing that, and there are surgeons now who will put a little balloon in the middle of the vertebrae and pump it back up so that it'll be the same height as it was before. And this is probably a useful thing to do. So now we're going to take a look at a meta-analysis of vitamin D and fractures. And this was published in November of 2018 in Lancet, which is probably the most prestigious British journal, and it was in the British Lancet Diabetes issue. And it is a summary of all available studies on vitamin D and fractures. And in these combined studies, there are 53,537 participants. And since we're looking at all of the studies, in some of them the dose of vitamin D was large, in some of them the dose of vitamin D was small, and in some of them the follow-up period was long, and in others the follow-up was kind of short. And all of them had bone density measurements of hips and spine that were prone to fracture. But then they actually counted how many of these people had vertebral fractures, how many of these people had hip fractures or fractures of long bones. And it turns out that out of these 53,537 people, vitamin D did not reduce any fractures or any falls. In fact, those who took vitamin D had an increased risk of hip fractures. So when the doctor says, oh, you got osteoporosis, you better take vitamin D and calcium, it's not the right thing to do. Neither of those will do anything to improve osteoporosis. None of those will do anything to stabilize your bones and reduce the risk of osteoporosis or fractures. So, vitamin D by mouth, in summary, there's no improvement in bone density, no reduction in fractures or falls, no reduction in heart attacks or strokes, and no reduction in cancers. So if your vitamin D is low, go out and get some sunshine. Mrs. White again. Nature is God's physician. The pure air, glad sunshine, the beautiful flowers and trees, the orchards and vineyards and outdoor exercise amid these surroundings are health-giving, the elixir of life. Outdoor life is the only medicine that many invalids need. And so it's important to prescribe that. I think that we've gotten into a vitamin deficiency issue because of dermatologists. And dermatologists have advised people to avoid sunshine because it'll give you melanoma. And melanoma is a dreaded malignancy. But the truth is, melanoma is a pretty rare cancer. It's increasing slightly. But we should advise people, yes, don't burn, and yes, use sun-blocking drugs, although choice of them is narrowing because the death of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia is partly due to increased ambient temperature, but it's also due to suntan lotions. The suntan lotion ingredients are toxic to the corals. So more from Mrs. White on vitamin D. Nothing short of nature's invigorating air and sunshine will fully meet the demands of the system. And so taking vitamin D is not going to make your bones any better. And using sunblocks are going to keep you from getting vitamin D. And the truth is, nothing short of invigorating air and sunshine will meet the demands of the system. So moderate sun exposure benefits health. Too much sun can cause skin cancer. Ultraviolet penetrates deeply into the skin. However, ultraviolet exposure accounts for only 0.1% of the global burden of disease. And so we have much more to fear from sunblocks than we do from sunshine. The pure air and glad sunshine, the flowers in the trees, the orchards and the vineyards, and outdoor exercise amid these surroundings are health-giving and life-giving. Now I'm going to talk about the next part of New Start, and that is abstemiousness. It's a word we don't use anymore. Synonyms include sobriety, temperance, abstinence, self-control, and moderation. And the Bible speaks of this. 1 Corinthians 9:25 says, and everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. And Mrs. White says quite a bit about temperance. She says you can have a much better condition of health than you now enjoy and can avoid very many ill turns if you will simply exercise temperance in all things. Temperance in labor, temperance in eating and drinking. And for the Blue Zone people, this meant pushing away at 80%. It's the 80% rule. Never eat all of your dessert. Leave some of it on the plate. Never eat until you're full. If you want more of something, leave it where it's at. Be satisfied with what you've got. Now we come up to another one of the words in New Start, and we'll talk a little bit about rest. And I include this in my book in the Nature and Science of Sleep. There is a recommendation of how many hours of sleep per day you ought to get. And newborns from 0 to 3 months can be expected to sleep 14 to 17 hours a day. And then 4 to 12 months, 12 to 16 hours a day, including naps. 1 to 2 years, it's down to 11 to 14 hours. 3 to 5 years, 10 to 13 hours, including naps, although I can tell you it's hard to get 4 and 5-year-olds to take naps sometimes. When you get to school age years, then 9 to 12 hours is important. And there are many children that get 7 hours because they stay up late with their Game Boy playing video games, and they're not getting as much sleep as they should. Teens should get 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Adults need 7 or more hours per night, and then 7 to 9 hours for those in their 60s, 7 to 8 hours for those 60 and older. And I find that as I get older, I take a nap occasionally, maybe 30 minutes at the most. And at night, I'm very often satisfied with 7, very often satisfied with 6, sometimes satisfied with 5. And so here is the risk of the metabolic syndrome, and we discussed what went into that the other day. And you can see that more than 10 hours of sleep at night, and you have nearly 30% increase in the risk of developing the metabolic syndrome. And if you have less than 6 hours at night, there's a 12% increase in metabolic syndrome. And the sweet spot is 6 to 10 hours. And with that, you're less likely to get the metabolic syndrome. And with women, the situation is similar, except with more than 10 hours, they get a 40% increase, and 8 to 10 hours, an 8% increase, and the sweet spot is 6 to 8 hours, less than 6 hours, and there's a slight increase in metabolic syndrome. And the Bible says something about sleep. It says, when you lie down, you will not be afraid. Yes, you will lie down and your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror, nor of trouble from the wicked when it comes, for the Lord will be your confidence. And so this is nice. If our mind is clear, and if we're have our sins forgiven, and we have the assurance of acceptance with Jesus, we can lie down and our sleep will be sweet. But the Bible also has other to say. Jesus said, come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And David said, I will both lie down in peace and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. And so for our clients who are sleep deprived, let's remember these texts and use them for an encouragement. Mrs. White says the importance of regularity in the time for eating and sleep should not be overlooked. Since the work of building up the body takes place during the hours of rest, it is essential, especially in youth, that sleep should be regular and abundant. And that table that I showed you earlier made the abundant sleep for children and teens very clear. And she goes on to say, one of the most fruitful sources of shattered constitutions among men is a devotion to the getting of money, an inordinate desire for wealth. They narrow their lives to the single pursuit of money, sacrifice rest, sleep, and the comforts of life to this one object. Their naturally good constitutions are broken down. Disease sets in as a consequence of the abuse of their physical power, and death closes the scene of a perverted life. And so we need to be careful that in doing the Lord's work, we not sacrifice rest and sleep as well. And I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about exercise and benefits of exercise. You know much of this. It slows your resting heart rate. And I frequently, in listening to the hearts of patients, will spot those who exercise because their heart rate will be 55. And I'll say, oh, you exercise regularly. What do you do? And they say, oh, I run, or I ride bicycle, or I do this or that. Exercise lowers blood pressure between exercise, but during exercise, your blood pressure does go up. Exercise helps with weight loss, lowers total and LDL cholesterol, and it raises good cholesterol, the HDL cholesterol. Exercise strengthens your bones and tendons, gives you less fatigue, you're more relaxed, more disciplined and productive, gives you confidence and an increased joy of living. And I may talk more, if there's time at the end, about stronger bones and tendons, so maybe Rondine can prompt me to that. So this is a study that is an old study, but it changed my life significantly. This is a prospective study of walking compared with vigorous exercise in the prevention of coronary heart disease in women. This is a big study, and it's a familiar one. We've used it before. It has 72,488 female nurses that were 40 to 65 years old back in 1986. These were healthy women with no coronary events, no cancer, and they followed them for 8 years. During that time, there were 645 coronary events, and they knew the exercise habits of these women. They're walking, they're hiking, they're jogging, they're running, they're bicycling, they're swimming, they're tennis, they're calisthenics, they're aerobics, and the flights of stairs climbed. And there is a very nice way to make these equivalent with one another, and that is through the MET. So all of these activities can be reduced to METs, and that will give you a way of comparing different kinds of exercise. A MET is a metabolic equivalent of the task. And so the number of women in each of these 5 exercise categories was about 14,000. And you can see the MET range goes from a really low level of 0 to 2 METs to 2 to 4.6, 4 to 10, 10 to 21, and more than 21. And the median MET was 0.8, 3.2, 7, 15, and 35. And so these are the 5 exercise groups. And the heart events, look at the number of heart events. As the exercise went up, the heart events actually went down. And if we took a look at these and made coronary event ratios out of this, you can see that for total physical activity, there was a more than 50% reduction in heart attacks for those who did the most exercise. For those that did the least exercise, there was a 30% reduction. For those who did the most exercise, a 54% reduction. But in this study, nearly half of the people had no vigorous exercise at all. And so they divided this group by the amount of walking that they did. They excluded those who couldn't walk at all. They measured the number of hours per week, and they measured the pace of walking. And they divided the walkers into 5 groups, and the number of person years in each group was more than 45,000 person years. And here the number of METs are pretty low. The median MET in that darker gray column was 0, 1, 3, 7.5, and 20. So not nearly the number of METs that they did with vigorous exercise. So how did this affect coronary heart disease? This is what happened in the walkers. Those with the least amount of walking had a 30% reduction in coronary heart disease. What was it for those who exercised a lot? 30%. And for those that walked the most, how much was theirs reduced? 54%. This is 54%. And so the truth is, and the importance of this study shows that walking will reduce your risk of a heart attack to exactly the same extent as those who do vigorous exercise. And I can tell you that personally, I ran for 10 years and I enjoyed it for 6. The last 4 years, I had shin splints, I was turning my ankles on dirt roads, and it was bad. And as soon as I switched to walking, which I did when I read this article, it was fabulous. It was interesting because as soon as I switched to walking, the birds began to sing. And rabbits began to cross the road, and it became enjoyable. Now, the pace of walking is important as well. The risk of coronary events was the least in the group that walked more than 3 miles an hour. So in my walking, I always walk I walk 3.2 to 3.4 miles per hour. And that is just an important study to show that walking is every bit as important and every bit as effective as any other form of vigorous exercise. Now we're going to look at, since the other one was done on women, I believe this is done on men. These are middle-aged men with physical activity. And this had 2,000, this is an interesting study because it had 2,322 men, and they were 49 to 51. And what's the mean of 49 to 51? 50. So these men were 50 years old when they were enrolled in 1970, and they were surveyed again at their ages of 60, 70, 77, and 82. This group of men were followed for 35 years. And during that time, out of the 2,322 men, 1,329 of them died. So 60% of the study group died. And that's because they were old to start with. And then when you have old men and follow them for 35 years, you're gonna, what do you expect? And because they went for 35 years, there were 61,000 person years of follow-up. So it became a big study because of the duration and time. And those with high physical activity had a 32% reduction in coronary heart attack deaths. And so even for middle-aged men, getting out and doing exercise is good. So this is what the authors said at the end of their study. Increased physical activity in middle age is eventually followed by a reduction in mortality to the same level as seen among men with constantly high physical activity. This reduction is comparable with that associated with smoking cessation. Very interesting, isn't it? So the exercise recommendations that are being made today is that we should have a minimum goal of 150 minutes a week. So divide that by 5, that's 30 minutes a day. And the optimum benefit comes in at 5 hours a week, 300 minutes. That's a lot of exercise. And most people who are working would rather stick with the minimum benefit. So I recommend 30 minutes, 5 days a week to all my best way clients and all my patients. But it's good to add some muscle strengthening exercises there as well. If I'm walking on a treadmill, sometimes I will, once I'm done, I'll do some upper body exercises to keep the shoulders and arms in shape as well. So safe and effective exercise you need to address appropriately for the weather. Loose fitting clothes are best. Wear good shoes. Your heart should beat faster. You should get mildly short of breath. You may perspire some. And calculating a safe heart rate, there are several ways to do it. Anybody's maximum heart rate is about 220 minus their age. And when we do treadmill exercise tests, we take a person up to 85% of maximum, which is 200 minus their age. And a good target range for exercise is between 55 and 85% of your maximum heart rate. There is a Carvonen formula for target rate, and most everybody uses that, and you can look it up, and this is it. You can take a snapshot of that and try to remember it. I have simplified that to what I call your target heart rate, and I like safety number is 180 minus your age. And for young people, it's a little bit too liberal, and for older people, it's a little too conservative compared to the Carvonen formula. But it's very easy to calculate. So if you're 45, you take 180 minus 45, target heart rate's 135. It works out very good. The Bible on exercise. Paul says, for bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having the promise of life that now is and that which is to come. So exercise without God stops when you die. Exercise with God's help, you'll keep going throughout eternity. Mrs. White says the more we exercise, the better will be the circulation. More people die for want of exercise than through over fatigue. Very many more rust out than wear out. Those who accustom themselves to proper exercise in the open air will generally have a good and vigorous circulation. We are more dependent upon the air we breathe than upon the food that we eat. That's really true because without air, you're dead in about 5 minutes. And when you without eating, you can go 40 days. Mrs. White also says, men and women, young and old, who desire health and who would enjoy active life should remember that they cannot have these without a good circulation. Whatever their business and inclinations, they should make up their minds to exercise in the open air as much as they can. They should feel it a religious duty to overcome the conditions of health which have kept them confined indoors, deprived of exercise in the open air. When the weather will permit, those who are engaged in sedentary occupation should, if possible, walk out in the open air every day, summer and winter. The clothing should be suitable and the feet well protected. Walking is often more beneficial to health than all the medicine that can be prescribed. For those who can endure it, walking is preferable to riding, for it brings all the muscles into exercise. The lungs are also forced into healthy action, since it is impossible to walk in the bracing air of a winter morning without inflating them. So true. Then diet, that's the first N in New Start, which is nutrition, and the whole book is about that, so we don't have to spend more time on that. And then there is water, which is the W in New Start, and we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about water. And Mrs. White says that pure water is one of heaven's choicest blessings. We need to drink it. We need to take warm baths. She says a cold or cool bath is an excellent tonic. A warm bath opens the pores, aids in the elimination of impurities. Both warm and neutral baths soothe the nerves and equalize the circulation. And the last is T in New Start. That's trust in divine power. We've already started on that, and I'll just share a few of these texts with you. I'm the vine, you're the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Isaiah 40, he gives power to the weak, and to those who have no might, he increases strength. Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us. Jeremiah 17, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose hope is in the Lord. Psalms 28, blessed be the Lord, because he has heard my voice of my supplications. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusted in him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart greatly rejoices, and with my song I will praise him. Psalm 63, my soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise you with joyful lips. When I remember you on my bed, I meditate on you in the night watches, because you've been my help. Therefore, in the shadow of your wings I will rejoice. My soul follows close behind you. Your right hand upholds me. Psalm 103, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that's within me, bless his holy name. And our time is up. That's the end of our first session. I'll be back in 10 minutes for the second part. It must be cold in there.
Yes.
I see somebody.
We have a question. You have a question?
Have a good break.